I got two hands, I got my mouth, I know how to earn money.
You bloody fools. I had to do that to get a reaction, and I knew right away that there would be shows done that Frankfurt quits YouTube yet again. Well, as I said, I choreograph a lot of things, and I knew I would get a lot of comments on it. You see, I'll quit YouTube when I really want to, not because you want me to.
Frank needs YouTube, not as a hobby, not as a diversion, but as a kind of last fragile life support. It's painfully clear how much he needs it. Every hour he spends on it, every reckless live stream reveals it. It is the only place left where he can prove he exists, where someone might hear him, might look his way, even if only to recoil. Without it, there is no echo, no witness, no shape to the day. This isn't optional for him. It's a compulsion that dwarfs reason, stronger than dignity, louder than any plea to stop. And so everything that follows begins there, with a man who cannot afford to stop no matter how thoroughly it ruins him. Frank remains on YouTube. Day after day, stream after stream, his presence hangs there, stale and persistent, like damp air that never clears. He is not welcomed, he is not liked, his name when spoken carries a familiar curl of contempt. He has followers, in the strict sense of people who listen, but not in the way most would hope. They are not supporters, they are onlookers, skeptics, bait layers, waiting for the next outburst, the next fabrication, the next small collapse. YouTube has brought him nothing but harm. It has cost him peace, privacy, and what little stability he can only now pretend to have. He is being deported because of it. He is named in legal complaints born entirely from his own broadcasts. The woman he lives with, if it can be called living with, pleads silently for him to stop. It ruins every day. It calls trouble to their door like a bell. And yet he does not stop. He has sworn off the platform more times than can be counted. Tearful exits, furious goodbyes, righteous declarations that he is done, that the audience does not deserve him. And yet within hours, sometimes minutes, he returns. The stream flickers on. The black screen appears. The same names, the same words, the same tired, meaningless wars, again and again and again. So what is it? What force pulls him back each time, even when all that waits for him is mockery and scorn? Why does he keep talking when the only thing that ever answers is hate? What is broken or missing or so deeply hollowed out inside him that even this, even YouTube, feels like more than nothing? When Frank declares he's leaving YouTube, he means it. In that moment, red-faced, scattered, drawing long drags from his cigarettes, the words are real. They come from something genuine, even if fleeting. There is no calculation behind it, no secret plot, no choreography. It is not a trick, it is exhaustion wearing a mask of finality. He is overwhelmed, cornered, frayed to the edge of himself, and quitting feels like the only lever left to pull, and then he returns. When he does, the story shifts. "What? You actually believed me?" he'll say, sneering into the camera. "That was just strategy, choreography. I was playing you. The joke's on you." But it's a lie, a sad, transparent lie, an attempt to save face after yet another emotional collapse. He pretends it was all manipulation, that he was in control, that he meant to deceive. But anyone who's watched him longer than a day knows better. There was no strategy, only instability, only mood, rising and falling like a faulty tide. Because Frank is not a man of resolve. He is a man of impulse. One moment, the pressure is too much, the hate, the relentless scorn, the meaningless lawsuits, and he swears off the camera. The next, the quiet is louder than he can stand, and he flicks the stream back on. It's not contradiction, it's pathology. He is driven by two opposite forces, the rising panic of exposure and the suffocating dread of being ignored. He wants the heat to stop, but he cannot survive the cold. Sometimes, in rare, lucid spells, he voices it plainly. He'll say, "Why am I even on here? All it does is bring stress. All it ever is negative." And in those moments, you can hear something flicker, a faint awareness that his presence online is not just toxic to others, but to himself. But lucidity never lasts. The quiet returns, the compulsion rises, and Frank, like always, comes back. His declarations of departure are not schemes, they are symptoms. the tantrums of a man who cannot hold a single emotional state long enough to exit with dignity. They are real when spoken, then forgotten, then rewritten as jokes, as strategy, as theater. But the truth is simpler and sadder. Frank is unstable, and unstable people mean things when they say them. Until they don't. Frank calls spending 10 years on YouTube tenacity, as if remaining on YouTube for a decade is some feat of endurance, some badge of honor earned through strength and resolve. He boasts about it. 10 years. I've been on here for 10 years. How many people can say that? As though the mere act of not leaving is a victory. As though persistence in itself is virtue. As though rot doesn't count if you never walk away from it. But it's not tenacity. It's not strength. It's not anything close. It's weakness. Pure, staggering, all-consuming weakness. Not the kind that invites sympathy. The kind that clings, whimpers, degrades. Frank isn't here because he fought to be. He's here because he has nowhere else to go. He doesn't persist because he's resilient. He persists because he's incapable of release. Because he cannot stop. Because letting go would mean facing the truth he spent 71 years avoiding. That he has done nothing, changed nothing, become nothing. There is no courage in this, no pride, no accomplishment. It is inertia confused for grit. Addiction dressed up as commitment. He calls it tenacity because the truth that he is powerless over his own compulsion would collapse him. There is no planning here, no strategy. Just the flailing grip of a man who needs the sound of his own voice bouncing back at him to remember he exists. Psychologically, it's not even complex. It's primitive. Frank is caught in the most basic trap the mind can set. He mistakes repetition for meaning. If he keeps talking, keeps streaming, keeps lashing out, then maybe the days won't feel so empty. Maybe the silence won't close in. Maybe he won't have to hear the truth underneath all the noise, that he is alone, unloved, and increasingly irrelevant. He isn't a figure of endurance. He's a figure of erosion. Staying doesn't make him strong, it makes him small. A man shrinking in public, clutching a camera like a child clutches a broken toy, too afraid to drop it because it's the last thing left in his hands. It is difficult to overstate how strong the pull of YouTube is for Frank. For him, it is not a platform. It is not a hobby. It is not even a choice. It is gravity. It is breath. It is the final thread keeping his hollowed-out life from drifting into complete silence. He has nothing else. No friends, no family. His daughter does not speak to him. The rest of his family cut him off long ago. He is not estranged. He is exiled. He lives in a foreign country with a woman who barely tolerates his presence. He wakes up to the same peeling walls, the same sour air, the same accusatory stillness. There is no job to go to, no calls to return, no one waiting for him. YouTube is not his outlet. It is the last door that isn't locked from the outside. When he says he's quitting, when he turns off the stream and sits alone in the aftermath, the silence is not just quiet, it's crushing. The air thickens, the walls press in. Because without the quiet signal that he's being seen on a live stream, there is nothing to anchor him in the day. No ritual, no witness, no evidence that the day happened at all. YouTube doesn't just pull him back, it drags him like a tide, like a riptide, like a memory he cannot let go of because it is the only one still forming. The strength of that pull is not rooted in ego, though ego plays a part. It's rooted in annihilation, the fear of disappearing completely. YouTube, even as it ruins him, gives him shape, a voice, however hated, a presence, however ridiculed. He doesn't log on to connect, he logs on to avoid vanishing. And that distinction is everything. And that is why, even with countless promises to Gilda that he'll stop for her, because she hates it, because she's begged him, he never does. Frank often refers to Gilda as, quote, the love of my life. It's one of the few soft refrains he repeats, a rare line in his otherwise hostile, defensive script. He claims to treasure her above all else, that she is his anchor, his proof that he is still capable of intimacy and devotion. And yet, when it comes to the one thing Gilda has asked of him more than anything else, to stop using YouTube, or at least to stop letting it poison every corner of their days, Frank fails her every time. He laughably insists, quote, I'm a man of my word, repeating it like a badge of honor, but this claim collapses immediately under the simplest test, because he's promised Gilda again and again that he'll quit, that he's done streaming, done brawling with strangers online, done dragging their private life into public spectacle, and each time the promise shatters, usually within hours. He can't stop. The platform has its hooks too deep. sunk into needs older and sharper than any loyalty to her. Gilda hates it, hates the stress, the fights it invites to their door, the fact that his fixation on YouTube has directly led to the threat of deportation hanging over both their heads. In truth, his relationship with YouTube is a kind of quiet betrayal, not dramatic, not violent, but steady and grinding. Each time he starts a new live stream after swearing it off, he chooses the cold comfort of strangers' contempt over the fragile peace Gilda tries to hold onto. It's a small domestic tragedy, one that repeats in loop without apology or real remorse. Because for all Frank's declarations about being honorable, about standing by his word, he cannot muster the simplest sacrifice for the person he claims matters most. YouTube doesn't just come first, it's beyond his control. The streams, the conflicts, the endless vigilance have become more central to his identity than any living person. If he has to choose between keeping his promise to Gilda or feeling the compulsion that shores up his fragile sense of self, he will choose the latter every time. That's the quiet, cruel truth of Frank's life. Even love, the one thing he tries to hold up as evidence that he isn't entirely lost, comes second to the endless need for attention and validation that YouTube so easily exploits. And every time he breaks his word to her, he proves again what little weight his promises ever carried. Most people could walk away, take a break, rebuild in private, but Frank cannot, because there is nothing else behind the curtain. No hobbies, no relationships, no self. He is not a man who goes online. He is a man who only exists online, and even then, only just. That's what makes the pull so powerful. It's not temptation, it's survival, or the illusion of it. A man drowning will grab at anything, even the anchor pulling him under. No one rivals Frank's obsession with YouTube. It's total. It has swallowed up nearly every hour of every day, become the only scaffolding left to prop up his hollow life. He wakes to it, he fills his afternoons with it, he closes his nights by combing through chats and replaying scraps of other people's streams, searching for stray mentions of his name. It is the center and circumference of his existence. Nothing else even comes close. And yet, in the kind of twisted projection that could almost be called dark comedy, he insists it's everyone else who's obsessed. If someone posts a single video about him, once a week or even once a month, Frank calls it fixation. They have too much time on their hands. He'll sneer, not seeing the grotesque irony in the words, because for every casual mention he receives, he responds with 10 streams, maybe 20, entire days consumed by circling the same petty accusations, the same stale boasts, the same fevered storylines, spun up just so he can keep talking. This is why even the smallest provocation blooms into days or weeks of content for him. One offhand remark is all it takes, because Frank is always waiting, hungry for the slightest excuse to pour more hours into the only thing that still gives his life shape. They move on, they make dinner, see friends, watch a film, forget he exists. Meanwhile, Frank sits there, long after they've closed their browsers, feeding the furnace of his own obsession, repeating himself so thoroughly that 5 minutes of his stream is enough to hear the shape of the next month, and still he calls them the obsessed ones. It's absurd, but also inevitable, because admitting the truth that he is the one hopelessly shackled to this cycle would mean admitting that without it, there is simply nothing left. No structure, no meaning, just Frank, adrift in a small room, waiting for someone, anyone, to give him another reason to keep talking. When others leave YouTube, even briefly, Frank frames it as failure. If a rival vanishes for a period of time, they must be fleeing. If they miss a week, they must be hiding, or they've been exposed, arrested, disgraced, or dead. He declares them gone, destroyed, defeated. In his universe, there is no such thing as stepping away with dignity. Absence to Frank is always evidence of guilt. This is not just projection, it's a self-soothing ritual, a way to reframe his own pathological need to stay as something noble. He doesn't just remain, he claims victory for it. I'm still here, he says again and again, like it's a virtue. They're gone, I'm still standing. As if presence is proof of strength, as if showing up every day to repeat the same bitterness is some kind of moral high ground. But it isn't strength, it's dependency. What Frank cannot comprehend, what he will never admit, is that healthy people move on, temporary or otherwise. They take breaks, they touch grass, they have jobs, families, lives. They step away because YouTube is just a part of their world, not the whole thing. To Frank, this is unthinkable. When someone goes quiet, he speculates, they must be sick, arrested, cowering in shame, maybe even dead. He says it with barely hidden glee, not out of concern, but because if they're truly gone, he thinks it makes his staying look like some kind of triumph. But that's the delusion. Leaving is not weakness. Leaving is health, the ability to turn it off, walk away and live in other rooms, other cities, other selves. That is not failure. That is what it means to have a life. Frank doesn't understand that because he has no other rooms, no other cities, no other self. This is it. YouTube is the last stage, the last audience, the last semblance of relevance. He's entirely consumed by it, not because it gives him power, but because it's the only place left where his voice still echoes. And so he watches the others, those who drift away quietly or permanently, and in their absence, he plants flags, declares victory, calls himself the survivor. But survival is not the same as living. And presence, in Frank's case, is not proof of vitality. It's the symptom of a man who simply cannot leave, because there is nothing waiting for him if he does. For Frank, YouTube is not just a platform, it is the total span of his days. He does not rise to greet the sun or start with any quiet morning routine. He wakes up and goes live. It is the first motion, the first thought, the only ritual that matters. There is no distinction between his life and the act of streaming. It is all the same narrow, stale room. He does not visit YouTube. He inhabits it. It is the only place he exists. This is why when someone disappears from the platform, Frank assumes disaster. The idea that someone might simply choose to go somewhere and do something else, to redirect their life, to focus on other interests, is unthinkable to him. To leave YouTube is, in Frank's mind, not a shift in priority, it is collapse, a sign that something is broken, that something has failed. Because in his world, departure equals death, and anyone who can leave must have lost something. Their nerve, their mind, their freedom. He cannot imagine it any other way. Psychologically, this reveals something deeper, a complete fusion between identity and visibility. Frank does not exist to himself unless he is seen, and not just seen, but seen on YouTube. This is not about ego, not exactly. It is about confirmation, about proof. The screen becomes a mirror, the audience becomes oxygen. Without them, he is not just alone, he is untethered. And so he builds a worldview in which being seen, being listened to, being active on YouTube, even if hated or constantly laughed at, is the only measure of life. In this logic, someone who leaves is not just absent, they are erased. Their silence must mean injury, because only injury in Frank's mind could make someone stop needing what he needs. There are no private lives in his schema, no inner peace, no personal joy. Everything is public and everything is performed. The idea that someone might turn off their camera and feel more whole, that is spiritual heresy to him. He cannot imagine it, because it would mean that his entire structure is built on something unnecessary, that his obsession is not strength but sickness. And sickness, in Frank's life, is never addressed. It is defended, ignored, or denied. That is why YouTube is everything to him, not because it's meaningful, but because it is the last hint of proof that he is still there, that he matters, that he hasn't been forgotten, even if he is despised. For Frank, hate is not failure, silence is. And the fear of that silence, that permanent, yawning absence, is the only thing more powerful than his anger. Frank depends on YouTube not just as a stage, but as a final stand, a fortress of control in a life defined by rejection. Nobody's ever kicking me off YouTube, he says, often and with venom, as if daring the world to try. The phrase isn't just defensive, it's autobiographical. It points backward to every door shut on him, every group that expelled him, every room he was told not to enter again. His family, his friends, his co-workers, the online forums and Facebook groups, they all reached the same conclusion over time. Frank doesn't belong here, and they acted on it. In Hawaii, it was a message board. He wore out his welcome so thoroughly that the moderator not only banned him, but threatened legal action if he returned. He didn't. In other spaces, Grey Gardens communities, Facebook groups, comment sections, the outcome was the same: conflict, exhaustion, removal. He was always too loud, too controlling, too much. Harassing the other members, especially if they were female, always on the verge of being tolerated until, inevitably, he wasn't. So now, YouTube becomes a kind of revenge, a place where he can't be removed by committee or consensus. Not easily, not quickly, and not without his permission. When I leave, it's because I want to, he insists, as if drawing a boundary not for others, but for the ghost of every rejection still rattling in his chest. His defiance is hollow, but it is loud. He tells himself this space is different, that this time no one can shut the door on him, no one can kick him out of the circle. But that's not strength, that's trauma repeating itself. Frank isn't asserting dominance, he's reenacting abandonment, positioning himself as the one who decides, because everywhere else, that power was taken from him. He stays not to participate, but to resist being excluded. YouTube is not his community, it is the only place left where he can still pretend he was never thrown out. So why this compulsive need for attention? This hunger that is its own quiet kind of disease. Frank's addiction to attention is not rooted in vanity, it's rooted in deprivation. It's a substitute for intimacy. He is not seeking applause, he is seeking proximity, the feigned heat of being noticed. Because for Frank, attention has always been the closest thing to love he could reliably access. Affection never came, intimacy never lasted, but attention, even hostile, is immediate. It wraps around him like a bad blanket, scratchy, insufficient, but better than the code. This didn't begin on YouTube, it began at home, in rooms where silence replaced affection, where love was confused with control, where absence was louder than presence. Frank grew up in the echo of emotional vacancy, learning that to be seen, he had to perform, embellish, provoke, lie. He was not taught that he was lovable. He was taught that he was ignorable, unless he made himself impossible to ignore. So now, decades later, that lesson plays out in endless live streams. Not because he genuinely believes it's interesting, but because he cannot bear to be unseen. His interactions are not conversations, they are collisions. He does not build relationships, he engineers tension, because tension guarantees attention, and attention is the only currency he has left. There has never been a single moment of peace for Frank, not once. In all his years on YouTube, there has never been a stretch, not a month, not a week, not even a single day, where he was not embroiled in conflict. There is always someone, usually multiple people, and when the well of outrage starts to run dry, he digs frantically for something new. He provokes, he insults, he manufactures slight after slight, all to keep the machinery of attention turning, because peace would mean quiet, and quiet would mean facing himself, so he ensures there is always a fight, always an enemy, always a reason to keep speaking no matter how poisonous the words. It's easy to mistake this for narcissism, and perhaps some of it is, but deeper than that is something more primitive, the need to be witnessed, to have one's pain acknowledged, even if only in passing. Frank cannot ask for connection, because he never learned how, so he demands notice. He provokes rage. He builds an environment where the only intimacy available is the intimacy of conflict. This is why hate is not just tolerable to him, it's desirable. Hate requires focus. Hate means someone is still listening, someone still sees him, and that, to Frank, feels closer to love than the silence he has known his entire life. He is not addicted to attention because it flatters him. He is addicted to it because it's the only thing that ever shows up. And so he latches onto whoever is willing to watch, no matter why they're there, because even the slightest attention is better than being left alone with nothing. Frank likes to pretend he has viewers, in the traditional sense, supporters, people who tune in out of loyalty or respect, companions along some shared intellectual or moral journey. But this is a brittle fiction. The truth is far bleaker. Frank's so-called audience isn't there for wisdom, or even for him, really. They're there to watch the machinery of his compulsion grind on, to toss small provocations into the gears just to see how the contraption jerks and sputters. These people, most using throwaway identities created purely for stirring conflict, know exactly how to keep Frank running. They drop comments that echo his latest grievance or nudge him back onto a favorite target. It's a form of low-stakes puppetry, and Frank is absurdly easy to steer. His need to be agreed with is so desperate, so immediate, that any line of text validating his bitterness lights him up. In that moment, he feels reinforced. Someone out there sees it his way. But it's hollow. They're not allies. They're stokers of a furnace they have no investment in, feeding in small coals just to watch the flames whirl up again. Because that's really all it is. The few comments he receives in his live streams aren't adding depth or detail or revelation. It's just tossing another lump of fuel into the stove, knowing Frank will spin it for another hour, repeating the same lines he said 1,000 times before. It's a hamster wheel disguised as discourse, and his viewers like it precisely because it never goes anywhere. There is a grim predictability in watching him cycle through his rehearsed outrage, his tired anatomical boasts, his rote condemnations. It's theater without a second act, and they keep him running in circles, because watching him burn himself down is the only real spectacle. On some level, Frank knows this. There are moments, rare but telling, when the illusion cracks and he snaps at his own chat. When the drama is swallowing him, when the weight of too many lies and conflicts is pressing in, and someone pokes at the scab with yet another question about this or that feud, he'll snarl, "I know all you people want is the fucking drama." It's a small admission that he sees the truth, that they're there for the dysfunction, not for him. But most of the time, he craves it, because even an audience of manipulative trolls is better than no audience at all. A silent stream is intolerable to Frank. It means there's no echo of agreement, no evidence he's still being watched. When the chat goes quiet, irritation floods in immediately. I'm not here to do a monologue. If nobody's going to comment, I'll just end the fucking show. He needs them, desperately, to keep tossing those coals in, even knowing it's all counterfeit, even knowing the entire apparatus is built on mockery and hollow intrigue. Psychologically, this is classic fragile narcissism at work, an inner world so hollow and brittle that any form of external engagement, even dishonest, mocking, or cruel, is seized upon as proof that he still matters. It is validation as thin as cigarette ash, but it's all he has, and in his private moments, Frank likely understands how artificial it is, how no one stays because they love him, how it's all a staged feeding of his compulsions. But for him, illusion beats emptiness. Even if it's all fake, it's still preferable to the final horror, saying something into the void and hearing nothing come back. What Frank fears most isn't hatred, it's indifference. Hatred is still a kind of tether, still a conversation, however warped. But indifference is the erasure he cannot survive. When people stop listening, stop reacting, stop mentioning his name, that is the real void. That is what he dreads. This is why Frank becomes visibly unhinged when he's blocked from livestream chats, not because his opinions are silenced, they were never opinions to begin with, but because his line of contact is severed. He lashes out, raging over what looks trivial to anyone else. The act is small, the wound it opens is not, because being blocked doesn't just deny him voice, it denies him existence. It's someone saying, not you're wrong, but you're nothing. And that, for Frank, is intolerable. Psychologically, this speaks to a person whose identity is not internally anchored. Frank is not a man with a private self that sustains him. He is a man who is only real when mirrored, in anger, in argument, in reaction. He has no inner world, no sustaining quiet. His selfhood is constructed entirely out of response. If no one's watching, if no one's replying, he begins to unravel. Because without that, there is nothing holding him in place. Even his most obsessive feuds, the petty fixation on Barry, or the endless collection of targets that fill his days, are not just conflicts. They're scaffolding. They give shape to his time, his speech, his sense of self. When they end, he does not feel relief, he feels disintegration. Because the fight, as toxic and hollow as it is, provides meaning. Without it, there is only Frank, alone in a room, surrounded by the sound of nothing. And that is what he truly cannot bear. Sure, he hates criticism and insults, he also fears consequence. But what he truly cannot bear, above anything else, is being ignored, being unheard, being irrelevant. Because in his mind, that is worse than being hated, that is, being gone. And this is why Frank fears silence so profoundly, because silence is the mirror that doesn't lie. In noise, in argument, in the cycle of live chat and rage, he can still pretend he matters, pretend he's feared, respected, envied, pretend he has purpose. But in silence, all of that dissolves. In silence, he has to face the shape of the life he has built, and what stares back is not a man of conviction or resilience. It's a man surrounded by nothing, a man reduced to noise, because the quiet would say too much. Silence for Frank is not just an absence of sound. It's an accusation, a judgment, a reckoning he spent his entire life dodging. If YouTube were taken away, if the last remaining conduit of attention and performance were permanently severed, the stillness that followed wouldn't be peaceful, it would be catastrophic. Because there is nothing in reserve, no private self, no deep friendships, no inner life, only routines built entirely around performance. Remove the stage, and the performer doesn't just exit, he ceases. Imagine it. No platform to stream to, no chats to lurk in, no enemies to obsessively gripe about, just the heat of the room, the stale cigarette smell lingering on his clothes, the rustling of Gilda in another part of the house, not speaking, not watching, no one watching, no way to pretend. The days would stretch, long and blank, marked only by meals, head pills, bitter drags off cancer sticks, worn-out Netflix streams, and the ache of his own thoughts looping back on themselves. Thoughts that once had an outlet, no matter how corrosive, now trapped in the cage of his skull. This is not a man who could go quietly into reflection. He is not wired for introspection. He has no tools for it. He has spent decades building walls against himself, and YouTube has become the final wall, one that broadcasts his words while sparing him the need to be seen. Without that wall, the full weight of unfiltered self-awareness would come crashing in, and Frank has never had the strength to withstand that. That's why he fights, that's why he talks, that's why he comes back. Because the silence is not just quiet, it is a tomb, it is a verdict, and it terrifies him. This fear of silence is not just a quirk of mood, this is the dark core around which everything else in his life orbits. The silence he avoids isn't simply an absence of sound, it's the raw, unmediated confrontation with who he truly is. And Frank cannot bear that. Because in the quiet, when the stream is off, the chat window closed, the last cigarette stubbed out, there's nothing left to drown out the truth. The truth that he has built nothing. That he is 71 years old, with no legacy, no skill, no craft, no hobby, no family who wants him, no real friendships, no evidence he ever tried to make anything grow. That he has become nothing. That stripped of the noise, there is no self to return to. Just an aging body in a stale room sustained by sedatives, nicotine, and the faint electricity of petty grudges. This is why he flees silence so violently. This is the reason why the pull of YouTube is stronger than any drug ever could be for him. Because silence is the only thing honest enough to show him that his entire life has calcified into a single bitter posture. That all his elaborate narratives, all his little campaigns against imagined villains, all his declarations of being right and strong and fearless, none of it changes the fact that he is alone, largely forgotten, and regarded by those who still watch as a cautionary tale rather than a person. Frank is not just avoiding silence, he is avoiding reality itself. Not all of it, because he's happy to embrace reality when it flatters him, when it validates his sense of injury or superiority, but when reality fails to reinforce his illusions, he rejects it outright. This is a classic defense mechanism, splitting or dividing the world into fragments that either serve the fragile self or must be denied entirely. At some point, likely decades ago, Frank discovered that self-reflection was intolerable. That to sit quietly with himself was to hear a verdict he couldn't survive. So he constructed a different strategy, perpetual deflection. If he keeps the noise up, if he keeps the battles raging, there's no space for reckoning, no room for that small, cold voice that says, "Look at what you've done with your years, look at what's left, look at who you are." That is what the silence means, that is why it terrifies him. Because in the silence, there is no one left to blame. No one left to insult or expose. Only Frank, alone with the hollow wreckage of his own making. And that is a confrontation he has spent an entire lifetime scrambling to avoid. To understand why silence terrifies Frank, you have to understand what the silence reveals. It doesn't just whisper, it announces. And what it announces is absence, not of sound, but of substance. Because when the noise dies down, what's left is the full view of a life that never became anything. Frank has amounted to nothing. That's not a cruel exaggeration. It's the plain shape of his biography. No career, no legacy, no contribution. The closest he ever came to a job with structure was janitorial work, and even that fractured under the weight of conflict. He couldn't hack it. He couldn't get along. In the end, he left, not because he advanced beyond it, but because he couldn't remain. Since then, it's been a long dishonest drift through disability claims and informal schemes, always avoiding accountability, always chasing shortcuts. There's no body of work, no craft, no project that carries his name with respect, not even a trace of quiet competence. The closest he ever comes is his fleeting credit as a research assistant on Grey Gardens, a minor, incidental gig he inflates into a grand achievement. Even that was marked by conflict, by Frank trying to push himself into circles that found him a nuisance, until lawyers were brought in to keep him offset. In the end, it stands like everything else in his life, not a testament to skill, but just another awkward story. The rest is a blur of evasion and complaints. Family? Gone. His daughter doesn't speak to him. His siblings left him behind, not in anger, but in exhaustion. There are no holiday calls, no old photos of Frank on their walls, no stories of love or sacrifice or growth. He did not build a family. He consumed one, and when it could give no more, it left him. Alone, not by tragedy but by consensus. And then there's the void where hobbies should be, and this might be the most revealing absence of all. Not even a single one. No music, no books, no crafts, no collections, no odd fascinations or passing interests, not even the empty rituals of casual curiosity. He doesn't tinker, doesn't garden, doesn't build models or fix machines. There is nothing he returns to for joy, for peace, for exploration. Not even boredom leads him to create. It's an astonishing emptiness. The absurdity of it is stark. 71 years and not a single avocation, not one domain in which he's developed skill or knowledge for its own sake. Most people, even bitter, lonely, forgotten people, find something. Frank found nothing, or perhaps more accurately, he refused everything that didn't center himself, because hobbies require a degree of surrender, of patience, of care. They demand humility, the willingness to start unskilled, to fail repeatedly, to look inadequate for a while. Most see this as the natural cost of learning. Frank sees it as exposure, as humiliation. But it's more than that. Even deeper, there is simply no curiosity in him. No impulse to reach beyond himself, to explore, to build something quietly that isn't about him. Because real curiosity begins with humility, with the acceptance that there are things worth knowing and worlds worth entering that have nothing to do with you. It means letting the center shift away from yourself. Frank can't do that. His universe has only ever contained one center, himself. That emptiness may be the darker truth. It's not just that he fears the small stumbles that lead to growth. It's that he has no appetite for discovery at all. The only thing he nurtures is his need to be seen. So when YouTube goes quiet, that silence doesn't just mean no one is listening. It means there is nothing to do, nothing to turn toward. No model ship waiting to be finished. No old record waiting to be played. No favorite book to revisit. Just a man in a room, sitting with the ruin of a life that was never built. Only argued about, then dressed up in cheap lies to look like something more. And that's why he keeps coming back. Because in the silence, the truth finally has room to speak. And the truth is this: he is no one, with nothing, doing nothing. After 71 years, that silence is unbearable. So he reaches for YouTube, not out of want, but out of need. Because it is the only thing left that can drown out the sound of his own emptiness. It isn't optional, it's survival in the narrowest, saddest sense of the word. Frank likes to talk about his live streams as if they're some kind of rich, expansive broadcast. A show, he calls it, in language that almost makes you laugh out loud. He'll boast that he has lots of topical matter, that unlike other vloggers who apparently flounder for content, he's a fountain of insight. But this is pure delusion. Frank's streams are not insightful, comprehensive discussions or meaningful explorations of ideas. They're looping, compulsive repetitions of the same tired material, so stale that if you hear 5 minutes, you've essentially heard every stream that day, that week, that month. Deep down, he probably knows this. It's why he has to keep saying it, keep insisting on how topical and diverse his commentary is. In reality, most of it falls into 3 pitiful categories. The first, and by far the largest, is his endless fixations on other vloggers. He'll circle them for hours, dissecting their words, their supposed health, their relationships, spinning the same insults he's hurled 1,000 times already. It's not discussion, it's not analysis, it's stale resentment on repeat, repackaged with slightly different adjectives to keep the illusion of variety. Then there's his so-called advice. Health advice, life advice, pseudo-psychology, always offered with a smug air of expertise. It's laughable, because it's never about genuinely helping anyone. It's about implying superiority. When he talks about cholesterol or lung function or blood pressure, he isn't educating, he's signaling, trying to paint himself as vigorous, disciplined, far healthier than all those sickly others he claims to observe. It's his way of grappling with his obsession with mortality by insisting he stands on firmer ground than everyone else. Finally, there are the wandering, shapeless monologues. Stream of consciousness rambles that drift from one trivial thought to the next, with no architecture, no insight, no real point. Tedious musings anyone might have while doing dishes or nodding off in a chair. Except Frank turns on a live stream to broadcast them, then proudly gestures at the output. See? Nobody can say I don't have lots of topical matter on my show, as if meandering through half-formed notions about local weather, or a mundane memory from Washington State, or a stray complaint about food prices, is proof of depth. The absurdity isn't just that he calls it a show, it's that he holds on to this construct with such frantic need, this idea that he's hosting something of substance, something people would return to for enrichment or clarity. In truth, his streams reveal exactly how hollow the inside of his life is. When you squeeze out the recycled attacks on other vloggers and the self-serving health bragging, what's left is just the faint static of an aging mind trying to fill time. It's not topical, it's not a show, it's a man alone with his compulsions, speaking them out loud because the silence would be too dangerous to endure. What does Frank have any viewers to begin with? Frank likes to say, if you don't like my shows, then don't watch, or no one is forcing you to be here. It's a neat little refrain meant to cast himself as just another harmless content creator whose style simply isn't for everyone, like a local band you might decide isn't to your taste. But this framing is completely false. Because people don't watch Frank out of casual interest, hoping to be informed or entertained in the ordinary sense. They watch because there's something uniquely transfixing in seeing a person unravel in real time. To witness the compulsions, the contradictions, the slow self-destruction of someone who insists he's fine even as he proves otherwise, hour after hour. It's not entertainment the way a sitcom is, it's fascination the way we watch documentaries about frauds, tyrants, or failed revolutionaries. It's why people are drawn to interviews with cult leaders or aging gangsters, not out of admiration, but because there's something darkly instructive, almost morbidly clarifying about seeing where certain paths lead. This is also why Frank's argument that you shouldn't watch if you don't like it rings so hollow. People routinely watch things they find disturbing, absurd, or contemptible, sometimes because it confirms something they suspect about human nature, sometimes because there's value in studying what goes wrong. The world watches political debates, scandal-ridden trials, disgraceful public meltdowns, not out of love for the figures involved, but because we learn something or feel something sharper than boredom. Frank happens to be one of those living case studies. And it's doubly hypocritical coming from him. Because if anyone is guilty of obsessively watching content they claim to hate, it's Frank. His days are built around monitoring the very people he says are beneath him. He watches them more closely, more faithfully, than any of his so-called viewers watch him. By his own logic, that dislike should mean disinterest. He'd turn it off and walk away. Instead, he studies them, rewinds them, gives long, repetitive speeches about them. So when he says, if you don't like it, don't watch, it's not a principle, it's a shield. A quick way to dodge the truth that people watch him precisely because what he shows is raw, unsettling, and, in its own bleak way, revealing. And whether he likes it or not, that is still a reason to watch. Frank knows people see how he spends his days, the endless streams, the compulsive lurking in other live streams' comment sections, the fixation that has swallowed nearly every hour of his so-called retirement. So he tries to soften it, to reframe it. This is what retirement really looks like, he'll say, with a dismissive shrug, as though he's merely describing the common arc of aging, as if he's just another man with idle hours to fill doing what anyone would do if freed from work. It's his quiet attempt to fold pathology into normalcy. He takes it a step further by reducing life itself to a cartoonish binary. Just because I'm not out skydiving every day doesn't mean I'm not enjoying myself, he says, smirking at the imagined absurdity of that alternative. In Frank's telling, there are only two options: extreme spectacle or sedentary repetition. If you're not dangling from a parachute harness, then of course it's perfectly reasonable to sit in a small, overheated room for a decade, chain smoking and fighting with strangers online. What else would there be? Plenty. It's the quiet tragedy of it. Actual retirement, even the modest, unglamorous kind, offers a rich palette of choices. Most people don't leap from planes. They tend gardens. They walk neighborhood loops. They volunteer, take classes, pick up small hobbies they never had time for before. They go fishing or play cards at the kitchen table. They fix up old tools. They explore slow fascinations, birds, old movies, family recipes. They keep friendships alive, stay curious about small things, build gentle rituals to anchor their days. Retirement isn't measured by adrenaline. It's measured by texture, by the quiet, accumulating details of a life still engaged. Frank has none of that, so he tries to dismiss it outright. He belittles travel, though he lives in a country layered with thousands of islands, each with its own dialect, culture, flavors, waters. A beach is a beach, he says, waving it off, though he's never truly explored anywhere beyond his narrow corridor between Battaglia and Cebu City. The one time he did reach beyond it, a trip to Baguio, likely to placate Gilda, or to briefly try fitting into the ordinary shape of other people's lives, he came back sour and bitter. Complained about the elevation hurting his lungs, the pollution, the logistics, the hassle, as though the minor discomforts of leaving his rut were final proof that the world had nothing to offer him. The notion is absurd. A beach is not just a beach, a town is not just a town. To stand in a new place is to see your own smallness reframed against a different backdrop, to feel momentarily less trapped in your own stale air. Frank can't allow that possibility. So he flattens the world into a single, boring shape, one he never has to test. By reducing life's options to ridiculous extremes, either death-defying stunts or endless YouTube feuds, he manufactures a justification for staying exactly where he is. It becomes less a choice and more an inevitability. "What else would I do?" he seems to say, hands lifted in theatrical surrender. "Everyone in retirement ends up like this." But they don't. And he knows it. This is pathology laid bare, the need to degrade anything he does not or cannot do, so that his narrow life feels less like a prison, to scoff at travel, hobbies, new experiences, even simple companionship, because acknowledging them would mean admitting he's excluded himself from everything else aging might offer. Better to mock it all as trivial, boring, or troublesome than to face the deeper truth, that the walls of his life are this tight because he built them that way. And now, trapped inside, he calls the cell contentment, because admitting its confinement would mean he put himself here, and that's a silence he would do anything to avoid. Frank often tries to salvage his indifference by claiming that other places simply aren't interesting enough for him. "If I found somewhere actually worth seeing, I'd go," he'll say, as if the Philippines or the world itself hasn't earned his attention. It's an absurd reversal of reality. This is a man who has never meaningfully explored anything beyond the narrow corridor of his daily errands, who cannot be bothered to step beyond a few routine paths, declaring entire landscapes unworthy of his notice. He frames it as discerning taste, as if his standards for wonder are simply too high. In truth, it is a hollow defense. It is easier to act unimpressed than to admit that novelty, depth, or change terrifies him. Easier to pretend that nothing out there could possibly enrich his days than to face the fact that he lacks the curiosity, openness, or courage to let it try. Travel is not just about looking at things. It is not simply standing before a monument or snapping a photo by the ocean. The richness of travel, the reason people yearn for it, save for it, remember it, lies in its layers. It is the quiet context of history under your feet, the small discoveries that tilt your sense of the world, the feeling of being somewhere that does not already know your name. It is also, often more importantly, about who you are with, sharing meals, finding small complications together, laughing over missteps. It is as much about forging stories with others as it is about the place itself. Even traveling alone can be an act of breaking routine, a deliberate step out of sameness that keeps the mind from hardening. It's not that travel is required for meaning. Many people are content close to home, tending gardens, raising grandchildren, hosting quiet evenings. But Frank dismisses all of it. He knocks travel not because he's genuinely unimpressed, but because it stands as a rebuke to the stagnant, bitter orbit he's chosen, by belittling it, by calling a beach just a beach, or a temple just a pile of stone. He shields himself from having to face the rut of his own life, one that repeats the same sour hour in the same airless room under the same dim bulb every single day. Frank is fond of describing himself as grounded. It's one of his favorite defenses against the quiet comparison that gnaws at him whenever he glimpses other people's lives. He watches YouTube and sees people who travel, who host panels with friends, who share glimpses of projects or families, or simply small adventures that break the dullness of routine. There's a kind of liveliness there, a sense of time moving forward in meaningful ways. Frank's world can't bear this contrast, so he reframes it. In his telling, he is the steady one, rooted, settled, content with simple routines. Everyone else is scattered, flighty, chasing hollow novelties without a stable core. "I'm grounded," he'll say, as though the plainness of his life is proof of some deep, enviable security. But of course it's not. Frank isn't grounded. He's stuck. There's a profound difference between choosing calm, centered simplicity and being trapped in a life so narrow that even the faintest possibility of newness feels threatening. Psychologically, this is a textbook projection. Frank takes the one domain where he's clearly deficient, variety, engagement, the outward reach of a curious mind, and recasts it as a moral failing in others. They're the unstable ones. They're the restless children who can't stay put, who need to run off chasing every shallow distraction. Meanwhile he, Frank, is planted like an old oak, too wise or too seasoned to be seduced by change. But the reality is simpler and far sadder. Frank's life contains none of these things, not because he's too grounded for them, but because he's terrified of what they would reveal. New experiences bring new comparisons, new risks, new mirrors. They force a person to measure themselves against different possibilities, to confront what else they could have been. Frank has spent decades insulating himself from exactly this kind of confrontation by belittling those who still pursue life's small expansions, trips, collaborations, new skills, even just richer friendships. He protects the fragile fiction that staying still is a virtue, not a capitulation. There's also a deeper wound underneath. Calling himself grounded lets Frank avoid the harsher truth that he has no real anchors, no lifelong friends who still call, no children who reach out because they genuinely want to share their lives, no projects or passions that hold him fast with meaning. His only real routine is pickling his broken mind with the same digital conflicts over and over. That's not grounding, that's entrapment. So when he says it, when he puffs out his chest and insists on how stable, how unshakable, how grounded he is, it's less a description of reality than a desperate assertion, a mantra repeated often enough that he hopes it might crowd out the darker suspicion echoing underneath, that he is not rooted in anything at all. He is simply motionless, circling his own bitter gravity because he long ago lost the ability or the nerve to go anywhere else. People often remark on how unmistakably miserable Frank is. It's not subtle. It radiates from every cramped angle of his life. The bitterness in his voice, the constant need to manufacture enemies, the way he paces his small rooms like a man who can't quite breathe. Frank, of course, notices these comments, and his responses reveal more than he intends. He'll sneer, "Who are you to judge if I'm happy or not? You're not living my life." The contempt practically drips from his mouth. It's meant as a wall, to shut down the obvious observation that he is profoundly, unavoidably unhappy. But the irony is stark. Frank spends countless hours declaring other people miserable. He diagnoses strangers' mental health, ridicules their marriages, calls their lives empty, all without the slightest pause for whether he's living their life. The standard he uses to reject scrutiny of himself is one he never extends to anyone else. Sometimes he offers a different defense. He'll insist he's always busy, doing things around the house, keeping active, handling projects. But this is transparently hollow. For one, Frank is compulsive about narrating every scrap of his existence on YouTube. If he were genuinely absorbed in private work or hobbies, they would spill into his streams. They never do. And when, on rare occasions, he sweeps a hallway or fiddles with laundry, he crows about it like a child, waving a report card, desperate to prove he's occupied. The desperation betrays him. A truly engaged person doesn't have to announce proof of life. More plainly, it's obvious Frank isn't busy with anything meaningful because we can see what occupies nearly every corner of his day. He is on YouTube, not in the casual, distracted way most people drift online, but with an obsessive, all-consuming fixation. Hour after hour, he cycles through the same petty grudges, repeats the same hollow boasts, prowls comment sections for the smallest mention of his name. And when he's not broadcasting himself, he's lurking on other people's streams and videos, scanning live chats, hungry for scraps of conflict. Even beyond that, it's clear YouTube haunts him when the camera is off. No one devotes this much time to a single arena and then neatly shuts it out of mind. You can hear it in the way he speaks. Every thought, every anecdote, every bit of petty nonsense is rooted back to something on YouTube. He carries it into every room like a stain on his shirt. This isn't simply heavy online usage, it's obsession. A single, narrow preoccupation that pushes out all other potential interests or pursuits. It's the opposite of a full life. It is stasis, fixated on the same tiny cycle of slight, outrage, and retaliation, punctuated only by moments when he rages or sulks more than usual. And beyond these observable facts is a deeper, darker certainty. No one could live as Frank lives and be happy. Human beings, even simple, unambitious ones, need some structure of meaning, some avenue of connection, some rhythm of growth. Without these, the psyche starves. Frank's daily regimen contains none of them. There is no intimacy, no creativity, no honest joy, no evolving purpose. It is a loop of vigilance and vindictiveness, a paranoid architecture designed to keep him fixated on threats so he never has to confront the emptiness beneath. This is a toxic pattern rooted in cluster B psychological traits, particularly narcissistic and paranoid features, where external validation, even through conflict, becomes the only means of regulating a fragile sense of self. His constant attacks on others mask the precariousness of his own identity. If he stopped asserting superiority, stopped his attempts at finding fault in anything he can contrive, he would be left only with the silent weight of his own insignificance. That's why he clings to his bitterness like a life raft. It is not merely likely that Frank is unhappy, it is written into every contour of his behavior. The irony, of course, is blistering. He calls others joyless, accuses them of hiding from their own misery. Yet when pressed on his own, he bristles. Who could possibly know his mind? Who could judge his contentment? The answer is almost painfully simple. Anyone with eyes. Anyone who's watched him for more than a breath. Because happiness, real happiness, does not look like this. It does not smell of stale smoke and echo with recycled curses. It does not spend every day proving itself by tearing others down. Frank's unhappiness is not a subtle defect. It is a central feature of his life, plain for anyone to see. Given how empty Frank's life truly is, YouTube serves another crucial function for him. While dysfunctional, it gives shape to days that would otherwise dissolve into formlessness. It allows him to build small, feverish narratives where he can cast himself as something more than a bitter old man in a stagnant room. He becomes, in his own telling, a community guardian, the vigilant watchdog who single-handedly purges threats. Take his years-long obsession with Barry Jordan. Frank didn't just endlessly squabble with Barry, he sculpted an entire myth around it. He framed his constant digging, reporting, and eventual role in Barry's immigration detention as a civic triumph. Got him off the streets, Frank said, as if he were cleaning up a dangerous threat to society, not an imperfect fellow expat with visa problems. In this tiny drama, Frank would try fruitlessly to lead others to believe that he was the hero, the protector, the one who took risks to ensure the safety of a place that never asked for his oversight. Frank threw away years of his life on this nonsense. And this is only one storyline among many. He builds dozens of these small, mean fables in which he alone stands on the side of virtue, unmasking scams, exposing criminals, safeguarding innocence. It is theater, of course. The stakes are petty, the villains in reality are nothing but personal irritants, and the outcomes are shallow. But it gives his life contours, a plot, a reason to pace the floor, to remain completely fixated on YouTube, to stay angry. Without these manufactured epics, he would be left only with the dull, shapeless weight of his own existence. A man with no work, no craft, no shared joy, waiting for another day to pass without any mark to show it ever happened. He even tries to style himself as a giver of advice, as if he were some seasoned elder offering hard-won truths to those wise enough to listen. He'll lecture on health, on life choices, on how to handle relationships and navigate well-being, dispensing tips from a seat of supposed authority. It's almost grotesque in its absurdity. This is a man who chain smokes through concerning lung tests, who lives in a state of constant anxiety and petty vendettas, who has driven away every meaningful bond he's ever formed. There is no wisdom here, no reservoir of stability from which to draw guidance. It's the blind assuring others how to see, the hollow advising others how to feel themselves. These performances only deepen the bleak comedy of his life, a man with nothing of value to teach, pretending he's been sought out for counsel. YouTube lets him pretend otherwise. It hands him scripts in which he is relevant, necessary, even noble. In a hollow life, that illusion is the closest thing to meaning he can muster. How does someone end up like Frank in the first place? It's easy to imagine some single, jagged trauma at the center, a catastrophe that cracked him open. But more often, men like Frank are not broken by a sudden blow. They are hollowed out by a slow, grinding erosion that starts so early it feels like part of their marrow. He was born into scarcity so deep it didn't need to be explained. It was simply there, like weather. A father reduced to wandering streets with a shopping cart full of paint cans, hoping to trade sweat for a few bills. A household shaped less by comfort than by the daily strain of figuring out how to survive another week. In that atmosphere, tenderness has no room to take root. Affection becomes foreign. Emotional need becomes a kind of embarrassment. Frank likely learned young that truth had little currency, that to be noticed you had to embellish, that if you wanted to stand out from the bleakness around you, you had to invent something brighter, even if it was only a story. Lies don't begin as grand manipulations. They begin as small, desperate bids to be more than invisible. But over time, those small lies become the only language left. Humiliation seeps in too. Children aren't blind to the judgments of others. They feel social shame long before they can name it. Being the boy with the father pushing a cart, being the kid who always seemed on the wrong side of money, of belonging, of stability, it cuts. And if it isn't processed with care, If it's met instead with more silence, more cold shoulders, it calcifies into resentment, into a permanent readiness to reject the world before it can reject you again. This is how a personality like Frank's takes shape. A boy who learns too soon that vulnerability is dangerous grows into a man who treats every bond like a threat. A child who learns to lie to be noticed becomes an adult who lies without even noticing. Over decades, these patterns deepen. By the time he was fumbling through middle age, getting kicked out of jobs and social circles, there was little left inside him that was steady or warm. Now, in the dim corridors of old age, there is nothing to counteract it. No forgiving family. His siblings long since done with him, his daughter far beyond his reach. No craft, no project, no small corner of joy built over time, only the same jagged defenses, endlessly replayed. Frank's story isn't about a single wound. It's about what happens when all the small cuts are left to fester, until there's nothing left underneath but infection and reflexive pain. It's why he can't bear the silence, because in the quiet, there's nothing left to distract him from who he's become, and who, most likely, he always was destined to be. It's a mistake to imagine that Frank only became this way because of YouTube. In truth, YouTube was simply the first place that let his worst instincts scale without resistance. Long before live streams and comment sections, Frank's life was already structured around conflict. If you read between the lines of his own scattered stories, you can see the shape of it. A man whose primary mode of relating to the world was through petty war. Wherever he lived, there were always enemies. The people in Seattle, he says, were too liberal, too smug. The locals in Hawaii were closed off, sticking only to their cliques. Neighbors were meddling, co-workers were conniving. Even in the simple anecdote he once shared about being brought to a professional social event surrounded by white-collar people who did nothing more provocative than ask, "So, what do you do?" Frank bristled with humiliation. His response was not the ordinary discomfort of a working-class man in a white-collar room. It was defensive mockery. Do what? As if clever evasion could mask his profound sense of inadequacy. The truth is that Frank has always nursed a deep inferiority complex, one that he tries to smother by picking fights or by sneering at the very people whose acceptance might have soothed him. Even in the simplest neighborhood encounters, conflict was his instinct. The incident in Hawaii with the dog shit is telling. A normal person might have been embarrassed, apologized, cleaned it up, and moved on. Frank instead escalated it into street theater, running home for a camera, hounding the neighbor, reframing calm words as shouting, gaslighting until the neighbor simply walked away in weary disbelief. Then, once the man had truly had enough and turned his back, Frank flipped the script again. "Walk away, motherfucker! Walk away!" As if he'd driven the man off by sheer force of personality. It's classic. Reality turned inside out to preserve Frank's brittle ego. All of it points to the same underlying pathology. Even decades before YouTube, Frank found ways to keep himself positioned at the center of tiny dramas. He didn't need an audience, just a foil. Some neighbor to taunt, some coworker to resent, a daughter to mindfuck, some community to stand apart from and disparage. Over time, it drove people off. Women with real careers, like the one who once dragged him to that party, drifted away when they realized he couldn't stand their competence. Neighbors learned to keep their distance. His own family, after enough cycles of manipulation and scorn, did the same. Without YouTube, it's easy to picture him haunting local hangouts, alone of course, picking at conversations, nursing quiet grudges, finding some man across the counter to despise for his jacket, his voice, his imagined politics, or hanging around hardware stores, talking a little too loudly about how everyone else gets it wrong, posturing as the only one who sees things clearly. In those days, the stages were smaller, the exits easier to find. People could just walk away, and by all evidence, they all eventually did. YouTube didn't invent these impulses. It merely ensured the exits were harder to reach and the stage lights could stay on forever. What we see now is just Frank's old familiar theater, finally given a platform big enough to trap him inside it permanently. Rejection is the through line of Frank's entire life. It didn't start as bitterness, it started as longing. As a kid in New York, growing up in a house where money was scarce and the atmosphere even tighter, he probably wanted what most boys want: to be accepted, to have friends, to be part of something uncomplicated and warm. But poverty and family dysfunction stains more than shoes and shirts. It stains how you're seen. Other kids notice. They notice the clothes, the low self-esteem, the stories that don't match theirs, the quiet sense that your family stands on different ground. So young Frank certainly tried to fit in. He would have laughed too loudly at jokes he didn't quite understand, mimicked others to belong, tried to align himself with groups who never fully opened to him, not out of malice, out of a hungry, ordinary wish to be accepted and seen. But kids are sharp, and social circles at that age can be brutal. More than likely he was awkward, overeager, not quite attuned to the give and take of small friendships. The rejections wouldn't have come as declarations, they would have come as slow exclusions, games played without inviting him, whispers that died when he approached, plans made where his name never landed, always the last one picked on a sports team in gym class. Those early experiences shape a person in ways that run deep. They teach you to expect not to be chosen, they teach you to look for signs of dismissal before they fully arrive. They set a foundation that says, you're always on probation here, and the smallest misstep might be enough to turn the group against you. Fast forward through his life and the pattern only hardened. At work, he tried to carve out importance to secure a space where he mattered, but his insecurity twisted it. He became too loud, too bragging, trying to compensate for that old sense of being overlooked. Co-workers didn't see a man to respect. They saw someone exhausting, maybe even threatening in his volatility. Neighbors kept their distance, relationships strained and fell apart. Each rejection layered on top of the last, until the original boy, the one who just wanted a place, was buried under scar tissue. It's why today Frank fixates on YouTube clicks, sneering about the boys' club. It's obvious what that is. Another circle he can't enter. Another group that hasn't opened the door. He calls it corrupt, exclusionary, smug, but the bitterness hides a simpler truth. He still wants in, still wants the belonging he could never quite figure out how to earn. When it doesn't come, he does what he's learned to do. He attacks, belittles, frames it as beneath him, so it will look like he was shut out. And this carries over most painfully into how he talks about women. The contempt isn't original, it's reactive, layered over years of being left, overlooked, or simply not chosen in the first place. The same pattern, repeated. Wanting to belong, not knowing how, being excluded, then learning to mask that private pain with public disdain. This is the tragedy of Frank's life. He didn't start on the outside by choice. He found himself there again and again, until staying there, building stories that justified it, felt safer than ever, risking the humiliation of trying to belong one more time. And so it's little wonder that YouTube rules his entire existence as powerfully as it does. Because there, he can be outside by design. He can pretend it was his plan all along. So when Frank launches into one of his many "I'm done with YouTube" declarations, voice shaking with rage or petulance, hands slicing the air in finality, there is no real suspense left. No one wonders if he'll be back. The only question is, how soon? It's a kind of morbid gambling line among those who watch. Will it be 3 hours? 12? Maybe he'll push to 48 before the gravity of his compulsion yanks him back, face sallow under the light, ready to declare some new grievance, pretending that he was just playing a prank when he said he was gone for good. This isn't the arc of someone struggling through an addiction, failing and trying again, inching toward sobriety. Frank's returns are not lapses in an earnest effort. There is no genuine project of quitting here. What looks like withdrawal is only temporary collapse, exhaustion from the current storm of shame or backlash. As soon as his nerves settle, the need returns. The certainty that he cannot stay away is not speculative, it's empirical. It's been demonstrated hundreds of times over. The reasons are both blunt and deeply sad. YouTube is not one activity among many for Frank. It is the entire scaffolding of his life. It gives him narrative. He can tell himself he is a community protector, an exposer of frauds, a misunderstood giant. It gives him social interaction. Even if that interaction is purely hostile, even if it's just conflict, it means he is still engaged with something beyond the walls of his decaying house. It gives him structure, a reason to get up, a ritual to repeat, a place to vent the pressure that would otherwise tear through him in private. So the notion that maybe this time he'll stay gone is simply misplaced. There is no chance Frank will leave YouTube for good, because there is nothing waiting for him outside it. The only things that could pry him away are forces beyond his control, being physically incapable of logging on, being detained under the legal machinery of his impending deportation, or dying outright. And even deportation, if it doesn't utterly break him, would almost certainly see him clawing for another foothold online, trying to rebuild the same sad theater somewhere else. Because this isn't about YouTube as a brand or a purpose, it's about the role it fills, the last stage left for him to stand on, the last mirror that still reflects him, however warped. Until that is forcibly removed, or until his own body fails him, he will always come back. Some people may wonder, each time he storms off, if maybe this is finally it. It's not. It never will be, because Frank doesn't just use YouTube, he requires it. Like a damaged lung requires oxygen, no matter how much poison it pulls in with each breath. In the end, it won't be YouTube that fails Frank. It won't be the watchers, the scorn, or the platform's indifferent moderators. It will be his own body, the same body he's neglected and poisoned for decades, lungs blackened by cigarettes, vessels strained by constant corrosive stress. This is the final irony of his life, that the one thing capable of silencing him is not an external force, but the slow mechanical failure of the only machine he truly possesses. Before that comes, there will almost certainly be another stretch of forced quiet, the many months he spends in detention, waiting for deportation to grind through its cold machinery. During that time, he might be granted brief windows to hold his phone, and in those scraps of access, he'll do what he's always done: post defiant messages, insist it's all temporary, spin fresh lies that he's about to have everything turned around. They'll continue the laughable claim that it's not his fault, never was, that it's all corruption, betrayal, misunderstanding, because the alternative is admitting he brought every piece of this on himself. Even in those tiny glimpses of the outside world, the compulsions will persist, but they'll be thin, insufficient, not enough to sustain the daily performance that kept his fears at bay. When he's finally moved, if the stress doesn't finish what his own neglect started, he'll scramble to rebuild. As long as he can drag air through damaged lungs, he'll find a way to sit before a camera and insist he's still stronger than the rest, wheezing between sentences, pausing to steady his breath, assuring viewers it's nothing, as he usually does when it comes to his health. Just allergies, just a little cold. His pride will demand it, because to appear weak would collapse the entire myth he spent 71 years constructing. But eventually, biology will win, where reason, compassion, and self-awareness all failed. And by then, even Gilda will likely be gone from his life. The stress of deportation, the bureaucratic chaos, the potential battles over selling the house, the scramble for money, the raw pressure of Frank's most desperate hour will fracture what little remains. Because Frank always turns on those closest to him in the end, Gilda will simply be next. Left with no partner, no fragile household to retreat to, he will enter his final decline utterly alone. That is where the ultimate reckoning waits. Alone, without an audience to distract him, without an internet to manufacture enemies or praise, without even Gilda's weary patience to steady him, forced into a silence that holds up an unflinching mirror. No more petty feuds to prop up his self-importance, just the undeniable truth of who he is, who he has always been, staring back at him in the dark. This is the grim symmetry of Frank's life. For decades he avoided this reckoning, filling every hour with conflict, with twisted little stories that made him the hero or the last honest man. Now the final silence waits for him, not imposed by moderators, enemies, or chance, but delivered by the very neglect he spent years excusing. His own failing breath will be the hand that finally reaches out and closes the broadcast. And in that last hush, there will be no audience, no hired companion, no echo of applause or outrage. Only Frank, unable at last to flee the one person he could never bear to face, himself.